Well, I think a lot of people who care for women in birth underestimate the power of fear and how this affects the process of labor in a healthy woman. It's because of their training, they're not really taught very much about the endogenous hormones, that is, those hormones that are released by the body in normal labor, in pregnancy as well. So we have two kinds of hormones that send messages throughout the body. We have the fight-flight hormones that are in the adrenaline category. These are very necessary for survival because, think of predators, threatening us, wanting, the time of birth and labor is a time of great vulnerability. So it's, obvious that in all species, the mother's sense of smell or sound or something alerts her to the danger, of a predator. And then her labor will stop. Fear means she gives off this hormone that makes her stronger, faster, fiercer for her to counterattack or escape. And so that's one class of hormones that we actually know very well, because that's why we have horror movies and roller coasters. It's actually kind of fun to get scared in ways where we actually feel that we'll be safe. It's exciting. Now, on the other hand, we know less about the calming hormones, which have the opposite effect, that keep us calm, that make us nurturing, caregiving, and curious. And these are the hormones that we like to have released in labor because they assist the process of labor. So when the fear is low and the calm is great, the body is releasing a natural oxytocin that forwards in the progress in labor, the opening of the cervix, the pushing down when the cervix is fully open to help the baby be born. And the time of maximum levels of oxytocin of the endogenous type in the body is at the time of birth, and for a period after, very high in the mother and the baby. And this goes with the emotions of love, gratitude, calmness, curiosity, and those things. So the beauty of the endogenous hormones is that they don't have bad side effects. But if we only use oxytocin that comes in through an IV or an injection, then we get more pain because the contraction of the uterus is more constant, harder, and can sometimes overstimulate to the point of danger to the baby, so that the flow of blood to the baby isn't so good. So along with oxytocin, we should mention also that neuroendorphins are released as well, and this set of hormones diminish pain. It can diminish pain in some women to the point where they feel no pain at all in labor. So because we don't know so much about the calming hormones, and because the institutional structures and routines that become normal, which actually aren't normal when we look at the evolutionary history of birth that took place in people's where they lived. So if we normalize a highly stressful environment where the woman is on view, and strangers can enter the room, we don't recognize that this has a deleterious effect on the labor itself, because a woman who is in a good, calm state can be interrupted and put into a stressful state, where her body perceives this stranger in the room doesn't know the difference between that person and a predator, okay? And so you got the wrong hormone action. It makes it seem as if her body's not functioning correctly when it's actually the environment and the circumstances are what's wrong. If one is educated in an institutional setting and never is present at a home birth, there's no, experiential referent for what calm is. And I think too many physicians, nurses, and midwives who didn't have any training or experience in a home setting take for granted something that is actually not normal when you look at the course of human history. So I, by my own story of entering midwifery, educated in another field, literature, okay, but because I had a stressful experience at the end of my first labor and had an unnecessary forceps delivery. I knew it was unnecessary, but I didn't find a way to escape that. And so I decided within myself, after hearing some stories of home birth, that that's what I would do the next time. And I did. And I decided, well, to be a midwife, I'll just have to arrange my own education. But since this is my body, I get to decide. And I chose to have the kind of circumstances that I knew would help me. I assumed that that would help other women as well. The main deal, the main goal was really to remain calm whatever happens, and then deal with circumstances if they arise. If something happens then that appears not to be normal, well, then we'll calmly get into a car and drive to a hospital. And then we will bring that same calm manner and attitude inside the hospital so that whatever must be done there is done as calmly as possible. Some of the things that I noticed is that labor can go backwards in some women, and that this didn't mean that she was in danger, but it did mean that something had to change. Maybe sometimes we just had to wait a little while till she calmed down. Or sometimes if she could see some humor in the situation. Of course, I had to notice that a woman that approached labor and was able to joke about it and have a sense of humor, she had an easier time than the woman who complained. I couldn't ever scold anybody because that would make the opposite thing happen that I wanted to happen. So I would have to gently tell stories to encourage women to not to complain, and to notice that what happens when you don't complain is that you feel a little better, and then we would move gradually into a more positive frame of mind, and she begins to learn this. She begins to trust that her mind and her body actually are inseparable. So as time went on, I noticed that there were some women that couldn't give birth in a position like this. Many could, but some had to get up. Some had to pull from something above. And when I saw how well that worked, I thought, I am not the first person to notice this. Later on, I got hold of a 19th century book that put together by a German-American doctor who got drawings that came from all over the world, done by doctors who watched indigenous women, and they were always in upright positions, maybe with a hammock underneath them, or pulling on a tree branch, or some kind of a cloth or strap from above. And I noticed that some of the things that I felt like doing were just the same things that existed in other parts of the world, I thought discovered in similar circumstances to how I discovered these things. I think that because in North America, the doctor that rose to the top of the hierarchy was the surgeon. This was different from Europe, where the general doctor enjoyed a higher status for longer, although that began to change as well. But for longer, the general doctor had this respect that also included a greater respect for midwives. Now, when you had the surgeon getting the higher respect and the new specialty of obstetrics as it evolved in the United States, it was based on really a lot of ignorance, self-admitted at the time, but this was not generally recognized. And so there was greater use of interventions that horrified doctors from Europe, for instance, that how many, what a large proportion of women were having forceps deliveries when they never would have picked up the forceps in European countries because the midwives wouldn't have allowed it. They would have said to the junior doctor, put that down, that's not necessary, just wait a little while. And if you're uncomfortable, you can wait outside the room, and then they would listen. But in North America, this wasn't the case, so gradually you had the elimination, the total official elimination of midwifery. That I don't think that had happened in any other country. And then, of course, what happened Central and South America began to mimic the US because it seemed like the closest sort of neighbor, you know, not separated by ocean. And I think there was little way for the medical profession, and certainly no way for the midwives in Latin America to know that they were following the not such a good example. When we look at the depictions of birth all over the world, we have them in all continents and all places, we see a woman and she's usually surrounded by other women. It's only occasionally that you'll see a male figure there. You didn't have the word doula used for a friendly female friend or relative. That was just a family member, usually female, that would be with a woman giving birth. So when that changed, you know, when women went into institutions and now you had the isolated woman and everybody who loved her is kept out of the room, you create a situation of fear and vulnerability and in some women terror. And now you've got all the wrong hormones going, they're going against the process of labor. And then those who work there, who've only seen birth done this way, think birth is a terribly frightening and dangerous thing to happen, and they're critical of the body rather than knowledgeable about that these circumstances and these attitudes are actually causing this phenomenon to shut down labor. What I learned from attending, you know, hundreds or 1,500 births and listening to the stories of my colleagues that we shared stories a lot, that when you're well prepared and when you're not afraid and you're healthy, almost everybody can give birth. And some will take a few minutes and some will take days. Both are normal. Just because a woman labors for more than a day, we don't get scared. We look at how her signs are. We feed her. We help her rest if necessary. We don't scare her. We talk to her. We help her in whatever way, but we rest assured that her body can accomplish this as long as everything's going well. And we check now and then to make sure all of these things are in place, and then life can go on. The same goes to the pushing phase of labor. We make sure that she can move around into the positions that best help her move the baby downward. And as long as the baby's moving downward, even if it's doing slowly, we're okay with that. We don't require her to lie on her back. We don't require her to have continuous electronic field monitoring. And as long as she's able to move like this, then we're reducing the number of women that are begging for, let's say, an epidural. And we can use water, we can use massage, we can use sense of humor. Some women, if she's having a long labor, and let's say she's out in the forest somewhere on some mountainside, and you ask a traditional midwife what you might do with a woman who's taking really a long time, she might say, I'd invite her to dance. And notice the language. I might invite her to dance. I wouldn't order her to dance, you see, because that would have the opposite effect. But inviting her to dance, then she can change from something where she's being rather stiff to moving, you know, with a fluidity and a rhythm that then comforts her. And this can also change the hormonal balance in the body more favorably, and it can help the baby move around a little bit so that the baby finds it easier to come out. I think that I think what you have in the Latin American countries is a great wealth of wisdom that is unrecognized. This is because the literate world looks down on the non-literate world and misses its wisdom. People who are non-literate have better memories. When they hear a story once, they remember it better than somebody that lives in the literate world. And they're less apt to be convinced by something that is written that is true just because it's written. There would be a higher value on experience, for instance. So when I found that my observed experience and my own experience with my own births clashed with what I read in a book, of course I believed what I observed and experienced. And I found it was more like the descriptions that came from the non-literate world. You see, so here I was highly literate, but discovering that the dangers in wrong words and the great power they can have over huge populations that preserved and eliminated traditional knowledge that had been with us for millennia. And it could be lost so quickly, you know, from one generation to another. So we can start to do damaging things, not recognizing the damage that we're causing. So medicine's the study of medicine is a process of trial and error. So now that some of the errors have been recognized, and for instance, in North America, we know now that every woman doesn't need an episiotomy. What helped us understand that? Well, for one thing, some people who later became doctors went to a poor country and saw women giving birth without an episiotomy, and they went, well, I didn't know that happened. And then they went back and said, well, if it could happen with that woman, what about this one? What if we just didn't cut? So they started not cutting, and they went, well, look, rarely do you have a woman that, you know, the damage is so bad that you would prefer the episiotomy, and who wants to be cut? Very few women, so we changed that. Now we're getting to the point in North America where they're reviewing some of their past routine rules because they discovered they weren't based on good evidence. So finally, we're having just, you know, not very long ago, we're having opinions issued forth that say, yes, women should be able to assume different positions in labor and birth. And yes, there's no harm in eating and drinking if it's, you know, done by healthy women, and there's really no medical contraindication to that. And no, we shouldn't be bringing in women in very, very early labor and then having them having a time limit from the time they entered the hospital when they'd be better off at home.